13. The craziest body transformations by bodybuilders. What if the most extreme transformations in bodybuilding weren't just about building muscle, but about pushing the human body to its absolute edge? These aren't ordinary success stories. They are journeys of obsession, discipline, and limits most people would never dare to test. Tonight, we reveal the most remarkable bodybuilding transformations ever seen. Stay with us, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Black Legends Revealed. Ronnie Coleman. Ronnie Coleman's transformation did not happen in a flash. It was built in the harsh rhythm of repetition long before the world called him a legend. Born in Louisiana in 1964, he was working as a police officer in Arlington, Texas, while shaping the physique that would later redefine bodybuilding itself. After winning the 1990 Mr. Texas and the 1991 IFBB World Amateur Championships, he entered the professional ranks with promise, but not yet with the overwhelming size that would make him unforgettable. What came next was one of the most documented physical evolutions the sport has ever seen. Over the years, Coleman turned a powerful frame into something almost mythic, eventually winning 8 consecutive Mr. Olympia titles from 1998 to 2005 and tying Lee Haney's record. What makes Ronnie fit a title about the greatest bodybuilding transformations is not only how much he grew, but how completely he changed the standard. At his peak, he appeared on stage near the 300-pound mark with a level of density and conditioning that seemed to break the sport's old limits. His training became part of bodybuilding folklore, brutal squats, deadlifts, and pressing movements done with weights most people would never attempt once, let alone for working sets. Yet the force of his story is not just in the muscle, it is in the cost. The same years that built his dominance also placed enormous stress on his body, especially his spine and hips. How far can greatness go before the body finally demands its answer? That question follows him through every chapter of his legacy. That is why Ronnie Coleman remains one of the most powerful examples of physical transformation ever seen. He did not simply become bigger. He altered what fans, judges, and future champions believed a bodybuilding champion could be. But the later years brought a harder image into view, multiple surgeries, chronic pain, and major mobility struggles that revealed the long shadow cast by such extremes. His journey inspires awe, but it also leaves behind a warning. In Ronnie's story, transformation is not just about building the impossible. It is also about living with the price of having done it. Shawn Rhoden. Shawn Rhoden's transformation never followed the rhythm of early success. It unfolded slowly, shaped by setbacks that would have ended most careers before they truly began. Born in Kingston, Jamaica in 1975, he moved to the United States, carrying both ambition and instability. At different points in his life, he struggled with weight and direction far from the sharp, stage-ready image that would later define him. But instead of walking away, Rhoden rebuilt himself piece by piece through disciplined nutrition-controlled training and a relentless focus on refining what once held him back. By the early 2000s, his physique had evolved into something distinct. Long muscle lines, balanced proportions, and a level of conditioning that did not rely on sheer size alone. What makes his story stand out in a conversation about the most remarkable transformations is when it all came together. In 2018, at 43 years old, Rhoden stepped onto the Mr. Olympia stage against a lineup dominated by heavier, mass-driven physiques. Instead of trying to outsize them, he presented something different: control, flow, and precision. That night, he defeated Heath and became one of the oldest first-time Mr. Olympia champions in history. It was not a sudden rise. It was the result of years spent correcting weaknesses, improving his midsection, and bringing detail into every part of his body. How often does a transformation peak at an age when most competitors are already fading? That moment redefined what timing in bodybuilding could look like, yet the story does not end at the victory. In the years that followed, Rhoden's career was interrupted by legal challenges that kept him away from competition, even as the physical demands of maintaining that level remained. Then, on November 6, 2021, He died at the age of 46, with reports widely pointing to a heart attack. The loss struck deeply because it came from someone who still looked like he had more to give. His legacy now carries both achievement and reflection. Shawn Rhoden proved that transformation is not limited by time, but his story also reminds us that even the most disciplined path exists within the limits of the human body. Kai Greene. Kai Greene fits a title like Craziest Bodybuilder Physical Transformations because his body did not emerge from comfort, privilege, or smooth momentum. It was built out of instability, discipline, and an almost obsessive refusal to stay defined by his beginnings. Born in Brooklyn, Greene spent much of his childhood in foster care, growing up without the kind of structure that usually protects a young life from chaos. Bodybuilding gave him that structure. What started as physical training became something much larger, a way to organize pain, control emotion, and create visible order out of an early life that often had very little of it. By the time he began rising in the bodybuilding world, people were not just looking at muscle size. They were watching a man turn himself into something almost mythic, dense, sculpted, theatrical, and instantly recognizable. His physique never looked accidental. It looked forged. That is where the transformation becomes so striking. Kai Greene did not simply become bigger over time. He developed one of the most dramatic visual identities bodybuilding had ever seen, combining mass shape conditioning, posing artistry, and stage presence in a way that made him feel different from more conventional champions. His back shots, sweeping quads, narrow waist, and expressive routines turned competitions into performances. He won the Arnold Classic and became one of the most talked-about figures of his era, especially during his rivalry with Heath, because he looked like a man who had rebuilt himself with total intention. How often do we see a body that feels less like genetics alone and more like a life story carved into muscle? That is the question hanging over Kai's rise. His transformation was not only visual, it was psychological. The body became his language before the world fully understood the person speaking through it. What makes Kai Greene unforgettable under this title is that his transformation never felt shallow. It was not just about size, symmetry, or trophies. It carried hunger, loneliness, ambition, imagination, and years of private ritual hidden behind public posing. He trained with intensity, but he also presented bodybuilding as art, which gave his physical evolution a deeper charge. The result was one of the most astonishing reinventions in fitness culture, a boy from hardship turning himself into a figure who looked larger than life. That is why Kai's story belongs here so naturally. His transformation was not merely extreme. It was cinematic, spiritual, and impossible to mistake for anyone else. Dexter Jackson. Dexter Jackson never looked like the loudest man on stage, but year after year, his body kept outlasting almost everyone around him. Under a title like Craziest Bodybuilder Physical Transformations, his story stands apart because it wasn't built on sudden shock. It was built on time, precision, and a kind of discipline that quietly rewrites what the human body can sustain. Born in 1969 in Florida, Jackson didn't arrive as the biggest competitor of his era. What he built instead was something more elusive: balance conditioning, and a level of refinement that sharpened with age rather than fading. By the time he won the Mr. Olympia title in 2008, he had already spent years crafting a physique defined by symmetry and control rather than overwhelming mass. That is where his transformation becomes almost unbelievable. Most bodybuilding careers peak and decline within a narrow window. Jackson extended his into something that felt nearly unnatural. He won the Arnold Classic a record 5 times, but even more striking was his longevity, competing at the highest level well into his late 40s, and even 50, still stepping on stage with sharp conditioning and competitive form. While others chased size, he refined detail: tighter waist, cleaner lines, deeper cuts. His body didn't just grow, it evolved, adapting year after year without collapsing under the weight of time. What does it take for a body not just to transform, but to resist decline when everything around it says it should? That question sits at the center of his legacy, because his greatest achievement wasn't a single victory. It was duration. Dexter Jackson's place in this title comes from that rare kind of transformation that doesn't explode, it endures. He turned consistency into something almost shocking in a sport defined by extremes. His physique became proof that evolution can be subtle and still extraordinary, that discipline repeated over decades can reshape expectations just as powerfully as dramatic change. When he finally stepped away from competition in 2020, he left behind more than trophies. He left behind a blueprint of longevity that still feels unmatched. A body that didn't just transform once, but kept transforming long after most careers had already ended. Flex Wheeler. Flex Wheeler's transformation did not chase size, it pursued perfection. Born Kenneth Wheeler in California in 1965, he began not in bodybuilding but in martial arts, where balance, flexibility, and control mattered more than mass. His early physique reflected that background lean athletic built for movement rather than display. When he transitioned into bodybuilding in the late 1980s, something unusual happened. His body responded with a level of symmetry and proportion that seemed almost engineered. Muscle developed evenly, joints remained small, and his overall structure created a visual harmony that judges and competitors immediately recognized. Within a few years, Wheeler evolved from an agile martial artist into one of the most aesthetically refined physiques the sport had ever seen, redefining what a complete body could look like. By the mid-1990s, Wheeler had reached a level that many still consider unmatched in terms of visual balance. Competing at roughly 235 to 245 pounds, he did not overwhelm the stage with sheer size, yet he often appeared larger due to muscle roundness and clarity. He went on to win the Arnold Classic 4 times in 1993, 1997, 1998, and 2000, building a reputation not just as a champion, but as a standard. Even fellow professionals acknowledged that his physique represented an ideal many could not replicate. His posing flowed with precision, each movement revealing detail rather than forcing attention. When a body approaches visual perfection, what else is left to improve? That question followed Wheeler throughout his career because his challenge was never becoming bigger. It was maintaining a level already close to the limit of human proportion. What deepens his story is what unfolded beyond the stage. Wheeler faced serious health challenges, including kidney disease and chronic physical strain conditions that would have ended most athletic careers. Yet he adapted, shifting his training toward control form and muscle awareness instead of extreme loading. He continued to compete at a high level even without capturing the Mr. Olympia title, a detail that only adds complexity to his legacy. Flex Wheeler's transformation was not about domination through mass. It was about redefining what excellence could look like when precision takes priority over excess. His journey remains a reminder that the most remarkable transformations are not always the biggest. They are the ones that come closest to balance and reveal how difficult it is to sustain it. Phil Heath. Phil Heath walked into bodybuilding with a frame that didn't immediately promise dominance, but what followed became one of the most striking evolutions the sport has ever seen. Under a title like Craziest Bodybuilder Physical Transformations, his story lands with force because it wasn't just about size. It was about how rapidly a body could be reshaped into near perfection. Born in 1979 in Seattle, Heath began as a college basketball player carrying an athletic build that was lean, functional, and far removed from the dense mass of elite bodybuilding. When he transitioned into the sport, the early changes were noticeable, but what came next felt accelerated, almost unnatural in its precision. Muscle didn't just grow on his frame. It filled out in round, full, symmetrical shapes that gave him a distinct, almost sculpted look. That transformation became undeniable when Heath rose through the IFBB ranks and captured the Mr. Olympia title in 2011, beginning a run of 7 consecutive victories. His physique stood apart not only because of mass, but because of detail, 3D muscle bellies, deep separation, and a fullness that made every pose appear inflated with life. Critics and fans alike pointed to how quickly he refined weak points, adjusting year after year with a level of control that suggested both genetic advantage and relentless discipline. How often does a body change so completely that it forces the entire standard of a sport to shift around it? That question followed Heath through his prime, especially as rivals struggled to match the combination of size and aesthetic balance he brought to the stage. What makes Phil Heath unforgettable in this category is that his transformation didn't plateau, it escalated into dominance. From a relatively modest starting point, he engineered a physique that redefined modern bodybuilding expectations. Even after setbacks, including a loss in 2018 and a later return to the Olympia stage, the imprint of that transformation remained clear. His body became a reference point, a benchmark others had to measure against. In a list defined by extremes, Heath's story stands as one of the most dramatic examples of what happens when genetics, strategy, and precision training align over time. It wasn't just a physical change. It was a complete reimagining of what his body could become and how far that vision could be pushed. Chris Dickerson. Chris Dickerson's transformation did not begin with dominance. It began with patience. Born in 1939 in Montgomery, Alabama, he came into bodybuilding later than most, carrying a background in art design and performance rather than traditional athletics. His early physique was lean and understated, lacking the overwhelming mass that defined many competitors of his era. But what he possessed from the beginning was an eye for proportion. He understood balance not just as a physical goal, but as a visual language. Over time, that perspective shaped the way his body developed. Muscle added carefully lines, refined gradually, and presentation sharpened with intention rather than speed. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Dickerson had transformed into one of the most polished physiques on stage. Competing at a moderate weight compared to his rivals, he relied on symmetry, conditioning, and control to stand out. His posing routines reflected his artistic background, each movement deliberate, each transition revealing structure instead of hiding it. That approach reached its defining moment in 1982, when at 43 years old, he won the Mr. Olympia title, becoming the oldest champion at the time. It was not a victory built on sudden growth or dramatic size increases. It was the result of years spent refining every detail. Can discipline and precision outlast the advantages of youth and raw mass? Dickerson answered that question on the sport's biggest stage. His legacy carries a different kind of weight. Unlike many transformations driven by extremes, Dickerson's evolution was steady, controlled, and sustained. He continued competing successfully into his 40s, maintaining condition and structure while others faded. His approach emphasized moderation, recovery, and consistency principles that allowed him to extend his career without the same level of physical breakdown seen elsewhere. Chris Dickerson did not redefine bodybuilding through size. He reshaped it through timing, discipline, and an understanding that transformation is not always about becoming more, it is about becoming precise enough to endure. Serge Nubret. Serge Nubret stepped onto the bodybuilding stage with a presence that didn't rely on overwhelming size, but on something more controlled, more deliberate and aesthetic that looked carved rather than built. Under a title like Craziest Bodybuilder Physical Transformations, his journey stands out because it reshaped expectations of what transformation could mean. Born in 1938 in Guadeloupe, Nubret moved to France and began sculpting his physique in an era dominated by mass monsters. Instead of chasing bulk alone, he pursued symmetry, proportion, and an almost classical look. Wide chest, narrow waist, balanced lines that made every pose feel like a finished composition. His early transformation wasn't explosive. It was precise, built through relentless repetition and an almost obsessive attention to detail. That is where his evolution becomes striking. Nubret developed a training philosophy that defied convention: high-volume, shorter rest periods, and an emphasis on constant muscle tension rather than maximum weight. While others pushed for sheer size, he refined density and definition, creating a physique that stayed full round and sharply cut at the same time. His performances at competitions like the Mr. Olympia, where he famously battled legends like Arnold Schwarzenegger, cemented his reputation as one of the most aesthetically complete athletes of his generation. What happens when a man refuses to follow the dominant formula and instead builds a body on his own terms? That question defines Nubret's legacy, because his transformation wasn't about catching up to others, it was about redefining the target itself. What makes Serge Nubret unforgettable in this category is that his transformation endured. Even into his later years, he maintained a physique that seemed to resist time, continuing to train, pose, and display a level of conditioning that most competitors lose decades earlier. His body became a statement about consistency, philosophy, and discipline stretched across a lifetime. In a list driven by extremes, Nubret's story offers a different kind of shock. Not the fastest change, but one of the most refined and sustained. He didn't just transform once. He held that transformation, preserved it, and turned it into a standard that still feels almost impossible to replicate. Lee Haney. Lee Haney didn't just build a body, he engineered a standard that would quietly reset the direction of bodybuilding itself. Under a title like Craziest Bodybuilder Physical Transformations, his story carries a different kind of shock. It isn't about sudden change. It's about how completely a man can evolve from raw potential into near-flawless dominance. Born in 1959 in South Carolina, Haney began training as a teenager with a mindset that separated him early. Stimulate, don't annihilate. While others chased exhaustion, he chased precision growing muscle through controlled overload, balanced recovery, and a long-term vision that treated the body like something to be preserved as much as built. His early frame was promising, but what followed was a transformation defined by proportion width and an almost architectural sense of structure. That transformation reached its full force on the Olympia stage. From 1984 to 1991, Haney captured 8 consecutive Mr. Olympia titles, matching a record that stood as the benchmark for decades. His physique didn't overwhelm with chaos, it impressed with order. Broad shoulders, sweeping lats, tight waist, and a fullness that never spilled into imbalance. Each year he returned slightly improved, never dramatically different, yet always more complete. That consistency created a quiet shock of its own. How does a body continue to evolve at the highest level without ever collapsing under the pressure of perfection? In a sport where extremes often lead to breakdown, Haney's transformation moved in the opposite direction, controlled, sustainable, and relentlessly refined. What makes Lee Haney unforgettable in this category is that his transformation never betrayed him. He stepped away from competition at the top without the visible decline that shadows so many careers. His body remained intact because it had been built with restraint as much as ambition. In a list defined by dramatic change, Haney represents a different kind of extremity, the ability to reach the summit and leave before the fall. His physique became more than a product of training. It became a philosophy in motion, a reminder that the most astonishing transformations are not always the loudest ones, but the ones that hold their shape long after the spotlight fades. Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold Schwarzenegger's story fits this title only when it stays where the real shock began, in the body. Before the fame, before the movies, before the mythology, he was a young man from Austria with a frame full of ambition, but nowhere near the finished mass that would later redefine bodybuilding. He began training as a teenager and attacked physical development with unusual seriousness, studying the sport not just as exercise, but as construction. By the time he won the Mr. Universe title at age 20, it was already clear that his transformation was moving faster than most careers ever do. What made it remarkable was not simply that he grew bigger. It was the way his body expanded while preserving shape width and visual drama, turning raw potential into one of the most recognizable physiques the sport had ever seen. As he matured into the 1970s, Arnold became the symbol of bodybuilding's most famous physical era. Standing tall with broad shoulders, a sweeping chest, huge arms, and a narrow waist, he created a silhouette that felt larger than the numbers alone. He went on to win 7 Mr. Olympia titles, but the real force of his transformation was how completely he changed the visual standard. He was not just another champion adding muscle. He was building a body that looked cinematic, even before cameras turned him into a global icon. His training style reflected that obsession-heavy volume, relentless frequency, and an understanding that posing mattered just as much as lifting. How many physiques become so iconic that decades later people still picture them instantly? That is the level Arnold reached. What makes Arnold truly belong under a title about the greatest bodybuilding transformations is that his evolution was visible, dramatic, and undeniable. He did not simply improve from contest to contest. He became the reference point for an entire generation of athletes chasing size, aesthetics, and presence all at once. His body did not just win trophies. It changed the imagination of the sport itself. In Arnold's case, transformation was not a side note in the story. It was the story the moment a human physique stopped looking merely impressive and started looking historic. Jay Cutler. Jay Cutler fits a title like Craziest Bodybuilder Physical Transformations because his body never looked like a lucky accident. It looked engineered layer by layer, season by season, through sheer volume, refinement, and refusal to stay second. Born in Massachusetts in 1973, Cutler came from a working-class background and spent time in his brother's concrete business before he ever became a global bodybuilding name. That early labor mattered. It gave him a dense physical base, but the real transformation began when he turned training into obsession and stepped into competition as a teenager. From there, his frame changed from rugged and athletic into something far more extreme: thick back-sweeping quads, enormous width, and the kind of mass that still held shape under stage lights. He did not transform into a graceful, classic stylist. He transformed into a full-scale, modern bodybuilding machine. What makes Jay especially powerful under this title is that his evolution was tied to one of the most demanding arcs in bodybuilding history, chasing Ronnie Coleman, losing, rebuilding, and finally breaking through. He won the Mr. Olympia title 4 times: 2006, 2007, 2009, and 2010. But those wins only tell part of the story. The more cinematic truth is how dramatically he kept improving, while carrying the pressure of being almost there for years. His physique became known for brutal lower body development, especially his quads, and by 2009, many observers saw him return in some of the best condition of his life after losing the title in 2008. How many men can rebuild an already legendary body after the world starts saying the peak has passed? That is where the transformation becomes unforgettable. Not just growing bigger, but reshaping a champion's body after public defeat. Jay Cutler belongs in this title because his physical change was not only dramatic, it was sustained under pressure. He built one of the defining mass physiques of his era, then proved he could return and sharpen it again when the crown slipped away. In bodybuilding, plenty of men grow. Far fewer reinvent a winning body after it has already been judged exposed and doubted. That is what gives Jay's story its weight. His transformation was not just from ordinary to extraordinary, it was from contender to monument. Brandon Curry. Brandon Curry's transformation did not happen in a straight line. It unfolded in stages that forced him to rebuild his body and his approach to the sport. Born in 1982 in Tennessee, he entered bodybuilding with strong structure and early success, earning his IFBB Pro status in 2007. For years, he was seen as a talented athlete who had all the pieces but could not fully bring them together on the biggest stage. His physique showed promise, wide shoulders, balanced lines, but lacked the density and detail needed to compete with the elite. That gap defined the early part of his career, placing him in a position many athletes never escape close, but not complete. The turning point came when Curry made a decision that would reshape everything. He traveled to Kuwait to train in a radically different environment, focusing on intensity, consistency, and complete physical reconstruction. Under that system, his body changed in ways that were both visible and measurable. Muscle thickness increased, his back developed greater depth, and his overall conditioning improved to match the size he had been missing. When he returned to competition, the difference was undeniable. In 2019, he stepped onto the Mr. Olympia stage and won the title, completing one of the most dramatic late-career transformations in modern bodybuilding. How often does an athlete rewrite their physical identity after years of being seen as unfinished? That moment answered the question. What places Brandon Curry firmly within a title about the greatest transformations is the clarity of his before and after evolution. He did not rely on hype or sudden luck. His progress was documented through competitions, showing a clear shift from potential to completion. His physique became fuller, more detailed, and more controlled, allowing him to compete at the highest level with confidence, rather than uncertainty. Curry's journey demonstrates that transformation in bodybuilding is not always about early dominance. Sometimes it is about recognizing what is missing, rebuilding from the ground up, and returning as something entirely different. Simeon Panda. Simeon Panda fits a title like Craziest Bodybuilder Physical Transformations in a way that feels almost unreal because his evolution doesn't follow the traditional bodybuilding timeline. Born in London in 1986, Panda didn't begin as a naturally massive figure. Early photos show a lean, relatively ordinary frame, nothing that predicted the kind of presence he would later command. What changed was not just muscle size, but intention. He approached training with a long-term vision, building his physique slowly through progressive overload, strict nutrition, and consistency that stretched across years rather than months. Unlike many competitors who peak for a season, Panda's transformation unfolded in public, documented step by step, turning his body into proof that sustained discipline can reshape identity itself. That is where the transformation becomes striking. Panda developed a physique defined by clean lines, full muscle bellies, and sharp conditioning that stayed relatively stable year-round. Competing in natural bodybuilding federations like Musclemania, he earned professional status and became known not just for his look, but for how consistently he maintained it. His chest, arms, and shoulders carried size without distortion, creating a balanced aesthetic that translated well beyond competition stages into global fitness culture. Through social media, he reached millions, turning his transformation into something visible and repeatable for others. How often do we see a body that looks this polished without the dramatic rise and fall cycle most physiques go through? That question sits at the center of his impact because his change wasn't explosive. It was controlled, sustained, and remarkably clean. What makes Simeon Panda unforgettable in this category is that his transformation blurred the line between athlete and symbol. He didn't just build muscle. He built a standard that felt attainable, yet still exceptional. His physique became a reference point for a new generation, one that values longevity, proportion, and discipline over short-term extremes. In a list defined by dramatic changes, Panda represents a different kind of shock. The realization that transformation does not always have to be chaotic to be powerful. Sometimes the most impressive evolution is the one that holds its shape year after year without breaking down. These transformations didn't just reshape bodies, they redefined what the human frame can endure and become. From explosive mass gains to late career reinventions, each story pushes us to confront a difficult question. Where is the line between greatness and excess? Are these physiques the peak of human potential, or a cost we rarely talk about? Tell me what you think. Share your perspective below and follow and subscribe to Black Legends Revealed for more stories that go beyond the surface.